let me turn my attention to a very big story through the day, and the Supreme Court verdict on the interest on interest or the loan moratorium case has finally come after several months. It did not disappoint those who track banking stocks and the banking sector at all, in the sense that the demands for extension of moratorium or more relief for certain sectors was pretty much thrown out. The Supreme Court saying very clearly that these are decisions the Reserve Bank of India and the government has to take. They do not have the expertise or the economic expertise to really take all of these decisions. One important point though, the Supreme Court has extended the waiving off of interest or compounded interest to all borrowers who took that moratorium for 6 months last year. Earlier, it was only for those who took loans or borrowers for below 2 crore rupees. That threshold has now been removed and it's for all borrowers. All of you all will remember that in order to ease the burdens due to COVID-19, the Reserve Bank of India had given a moratorium to all categories of borrowers last year, which was first for 3 months and then extended for 6 months, during which people didn't have to pay their installments, but this would not be seen as a bad loan. It would only be under moratorium. The whole case in the Supreme Court, among other things, was about whether a compounded interest should be charged on that period or not. Another big relief for banks, that the Supreme Court stay on classifying loans as NPAs if people can't pay back or if entities can't pay back has been lifted. The question is, what does that do to the books of the bank as well? So to speak on some of these issues, I'm joined now by Mythili Bhusnurmath, consulting editor ET Now, and of course R Gandhi, former RBI Deputy Governor. Welcome to both of you and thank you for speaking with us today. Mr. Gandhi, I want to first get your take on the Supreme Court judgment and the far-reaching effects it will have on the banking sector, especially now. Once the NPA classification, stay is off, what do you think happens to the balance sheets?
Yes, the verdict has come as a big relief because everyone definitely wanted what the Supreme Court has today said. That's what we wanted to hear. That way it is a big relief. Yes, to what extent it is likely to be impacting the balance sheet or the P&L of the banks? That is to the extent that this compound interest is not permitted by the Supreme Court verdict. So to that extent, there will be a reduction, a small reduction in the total revenues of the banks. That is that will be there because that is a natural accounting perspective. There will be a reduction, but it should be possible for the banks to bear that kind of loss. It may not. I hope that it won't be sizable because right now there is no estimate about the number, how much, how large it will be. It could be. Different banks may be affected differently. So that we need to see when the banks will come out with their this quarter financials or the end of the year financials, we'll see. But I only do hope that it is unlikely to be impacting too much of their revenue potential. On the balance sheet side, what is the likely impact? Yes, now that verdict has come, until this time, all these accounts, the banks could not proceed to determine whether they are NPA or not. So that embargo has been cleared now. So we need to be looking at what kind of NPA increase is going to be there. But a relieving factor is that most of the banks, anticipating that these accounts will be NPA, they are already kind of made provisions, or they have enough kitty to meet that kind of requirement. So that way, to that extent, adverse impact on their financials may not be there, except the number, NPA number would go up, basically because of this release. And that is the second point. And third point, we should remember that many of these borrowers during moratorium, many, even though they are eligible, they did not actually avail the moratorium. They did pay off. So now from this group also, I would expect some, now that the Supreme Court has clearly mentioned, some borrowers will certainly pay up their dues. So that, to that extent, NPA could be lesser. Let us hope that it will come out the way we expect.
Sure. There are estimates that 7,000 to 7,500 crore rupees can be the additional payout for banks who have already collected that compound interest and will now have to give it back. It will remain to be seen whether the government will foot that bill as they said they would for borrowers of up to 2 crore rupees, and will there be a different outlook on those above 2 crore rupees. But Mythili, what I want from you is your take on what precedent this sets. A lot of debate over this entire case was on the question of moral hazard. Should borrowers be spared compound interest, which is a function of how the banking system works, because of a situation like COVID-19? That was at the crux of the entire case. And that question has been answered very clearly in one direction. What kind of a precedent does it set?
Well, I'm not sure it's been entirely answered. Tamanna, for the simple reason that though there is a tacit admission by the court that there can be something such as a judicial overreach, because the court has clearly said that it should steer clear, because courts are not advisors to the executive on matters of economic policy. So having said that and leave it to the banks, RBI and the government, on the matter of interest on interest, it is compounding. It eats its own words, as it were, by saying that you should give it not only to those who are below 2 crores, but those above. So having once stated that courts should steer clear of framing economic policy, matters of economic policy, then the court contradicts itself on exactly the same thing by saying, now why don't you extend it to more than 2 crores? So I'm not sure that it's really clarified things completely. Ideally, the court should never have entertained this in the first place, because it's clearly something that was completely out of the domain of the courts. But having entertained it, I think they have, yes, ended the impasse, and it's some kind of uncertainty. But I would have been happier if the courts had gone ahead and said this is purely a matter that is left to the regulator and the government. In fact, compounding is not something that is left to the government. Who bears the cost could be left to the government. But compounding is a matter of banking practice all over the world. And if you did not compound your interest on the borrowers, how are you going to pay the depositors? In fact, that would be a gross miscarriage of justice, something that the Supreme Court is supposed to uphold. So I'm not entirely happy with the judgment. Yes, it is better than what it was. For one, it's ended the uncertainty. And for secondly, the court has admitted that this is something that the court should not enter. But as I said, I would be happier if they really walked the talk and not said anything about the below 2 crores, above 2 crores, because that again is something that is purely in the hands of the regulator and the executive.
Mr. Gandhi, same question to you about waiving off the compound interest during the moratorium, and how do you think that this will pan out? Is it now cut and dry that the government will have to foot the bill, or can this fall upon banks? Also, the question of precedent that it sets, which I'd asked Mythili as well. Your take on this?
I fully agree with Mythili. What she said is exactly my thinking also, in the sense that this actually sets a sad precedent. A compounding interest is a general practice across the world, and banks do have the discretion to waive it based on their assessment of restructuring those loans. Or resolution, as a part of the resolution, banks can modify it. That is a discretion in the hands of the banks that should have been left to their discretion to determine how it should be done. Yes, government as a public policy, it can always come forward to meet a portion or the full of that cost. So earlier, government has said that up to 2 crore, whatever is the compounding interest, it will bear, so that banks are not commercially affected by the income stream. Now, the above 2 crore, whether the government will be coming forward to meet, that we need to see how that again, the numbers we have to look at what is the kind of split between out of the total 7,000 crores which you mentioned, how much is going to be relating to the more than 2 crore related advances. So whether that government will be willing to bear that, or banks will have to bear that, these questions do come up. But certainly it is a bad precedent. We would have definitely liked not to have that precedent set in the future, because once such a precedent has been set in, today the excuse has been because of the pandemic. So tomorrow it could be some other thing. So it will be very difficult to upfront now say that such precedents will not be quoted again and again in the future. It will always be coming up. Again, there will be a tug of war between the regulator and the government, and maybe again to the court.
Which is why this is a case with such far-reaching import and important to look at from all aspects today. That's all the time we have, but I really want to thank you, Mr. Gandhi and Mythili, for joining us on the show this evening. We'll take a very short break, but stay with us. India Revival Mission up next.